second speaker from the opposition. Now I'd like to call upon, or rather introduce, the third speaker from the opposition, Tom Miller.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a fundamental assertion by side opposition in this debate on which they have based all their arguments, all their points, and that is that China wants a mutual benefits relationship with Africa. They have not examined any of the myriad of reasons the side proposition has given you today as why this is just quite frankly not the case, and why there are many falsifications on side opposition's side. Okay. So what has side proposition done in today's debate, and what did side opposition need to do? Where was their burden lying in relation to ours? Well, we showed you two very fundamental levels why economic development and social development are going to be best suited under a Western investment plan. They need to show us why a Chinese development investment plan was in fact better for the people on these two levels. It wasn't for us to show why China was worse, merely to show why the West is better. And we feel that we did this. Their first misunderstanding came in the line where they thought that aid was in this debate, and they tried to clear this up in their second speaker, but I'm afraid you can't ignore it. Aid is not a part of this debate. Loans are not a part of this debate. It's about investment. And there were a myriad of arguments which they brought up, such as the idea that they're talking about development investment and not money being put into dictators' bank accounts, and the whole debt analysis which they gave, which all fall outside of this debate, merely for the fact that it was all about aid. And this debate is about capital investment, as my first speaker clearly put out there. Not only that, but they gave us a myriad of examples about the Chinese and what they're trying to do through aid, and really, this is not true. The Chinese are giving aid and weapons to Mr. Mugabe, an oppressive regime. The Chinese, in fact, vetoed the Sudan solution plan many times before they finally carried on supplying weapons and money straight to the Sudanese dictatorship who were oppressing people in their own country. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not aid. Ladies and gentlemen, that's helping to oppress. And that's what side proposition does not stand for, even though it falls outside the debate. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so what does stand in this debate? There are two basic things which are being contested here. Firstly, the effectiveness of the comparative basis of the two investment plans, and secondly, human rights, which was contested a little bit in the second speaker. Okay, on to my first point, which is as the effectiveness of the two plans. There's three sub-points here which are contested. Firstly, that unconditional aid is better. Secondly, that there's an equal relationship between the two. And thirdly, that labor and manufacturing is somehow is not aided under the Western system. So firstly, unconditional. Now, firstly, this is just a theoretical switch which we're doing here, which is not so much the matter. But second, we say that conditional investment is quite a good thing. Since, as my second speaker clearly showed, it has a large number of benefits for democracy, and not only for opening up the areas which the countries which are involved, and thus aiding the people to a further extent. Not only that, but China has in fact started to give conditional aid. Started to give conditional investment, and along the lines of this argumentation, they in fact, through my second speaker's argumentation that the Chinese are giving demands on the African nations to vote in line with them in the UN and stuff, they are in fact putting conditions on the aid, that they will pull out that aid if you do not toe the Chinese line. A line the side proposition fundamentally disagrees with. I'll take the middle one.
So do you realize that the issue at hand is really whether or not Western are better than Chinese investment? You fail to understand.
Ma'am, that's what our entire debate's been about, and you just ignored it. Ladies and gentlemen, it is about whether the West is better than China, and the West is, because we've given you reasons. They've given you examples. Sit down. Okay. So basically, it is conditional from China and from the West. However, the Western conditions are conditions that we want to put in place to help the people of Africa, rather than further subjugate them to all these insane things about human rights deprivation and such. Okay. On to the second idea. And this is the idea of the equal relationship between the two. And this really isn't the fact. This is what my second speaker brought up in his analysis, that China is a manufacturing economy. That China relies on resources. That is the only reason that they're going into Africa. They're going there to exploit the resources of Africa, because they have none of their own naturally. And what they have, though, is the best manufacturing system in the world. There's absolutely zero incentivization for China to build manufacturing in Africa, as I'll be getting to later. But And primarily the fact is that there's no equal relationship here. China will use any and every means to get every drop of resources out of Africa. And the only sort of reason the side opposition gave us of this is not good or something is that in the past there was colonialism was implied and that the West has done bad things and so they'll carry on. Well really, ladies and gentlemen, they need to look here and now, and China is exploiting Africa right now. The West is trying to help. So why deny the hand that wants to help you and let them continue to exploit your reasons for some abstract historical reason? That is not reason enough. No thank you. Okay, so now the real crux of this debate came down to this issue was labor and manufacturing. And now, first idea was this labor. Now, firstly they had blatant falsifications, so they did that China trains labor and such. There's zero incentivization for China to train laborers when they have the cheapest laborers in the world. Why would they want to do that? Not only that, but they use prison labor, which is free. Whereas in Africa, you have to pay people and train people and do all sorts of hard things like that. Whereas the Westerners have this idea that they have companies going into Africa, and since Western labor is extremely expensive, they need the laborers in Africa and they need to train them as well since they have no skills. And so along this line, they will put up training colleges. There's more incentivization for them to build schools, all these things that they claim China does, which they blatantly do not, since there's no incentivization for them. But not only this, but they never even back themselves up in saying this. The next idea which came along was the idea of manufacturing. And well, the West is all secretive in their manufacturing methods, and China's so open. The Chinese manufacturing is in China. So how on earth is Africa going to know how to use Chinese manufacturing when they never go to China? So ladies and gentlemen, it's quite bizarre. No, the West has to train skilled people to do the manufacturing in Africa, because that's where the manufacturing will happen with the West. With China, we put on a Chinese ship and sent back to China to be manufactured by Chinese people, to be sold back into Africa, which is what we say is economically detrimental to huge degrees. But the final idea about all the manufacturing is that really, about the labor, is that with this labor, there will be dual areas of labor. So it's not only will there be labor in the resource exploitation, which is what China will only be doing, but it's because of this idea of manufacturing, as I showed you, there will be manufacturing in Africa from the West, and so there will be manufacturing, and there will be more labor involved there. My final quick argumentation is that of human rights. And really, China doesn't push for human rights, as they would say. You can look at the Sudan example again. Who gives guns to a mad dictator? Who gives guns to people who are blatantly committing a genocide and then votes against them from being helped? No, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the actions of a human rights accepting country. These are human rights abusers, and that's what they will do to the whole of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, vote for the West.